This man had always loved playing games since his childhood. He was always in the hospital, so he also always had time to play. Games eventually became an important part of his life. But they say that you get tired of something if you keep doing it for too long. One day, playing games was no longer as fun as it used to be. RPG, FPS, AOS, the genre did not matter to him. The problem was that every game that came out each year felt like trash. The stories and world building were completely the same and stereotyped, and there was no depth in the systems. That was when he discovered a game called Dungeon and Stone, a game with 2D pixel graphics that was quite rare at that time. He realized that it seemed to be his type of game, but it was only in English. Even so, it was free, so he decided to give it a try. There were not many classes to choose from, but he chose the Barbarian. Why did he pick just any class? He knew he would not play for that long anyway. So he did not take the game very seriously at first, but he thought that it had been a long time since he had played a vertical scrolling game. He noticed that the illustrations were actually pretty good. Then, without realizing it, he played the game all day. He became obsessed with Dungeon and Stone. The game was really fun. There were many characters. Some could be considered unique, and others terrible. But at least the allied NPC was important in the game, and when you died, you had to start all over again. At first it was fun, but later he became so angry that he would shout, and the nurse would scold him. After that, he became completely focused on trying to finish the game. The game was practically a failure. It had no tutorials, neither in Korean nor in English. Still, no matter how long it took, he kept playing. He started playing in the hospital, continued playing when he became a public servant, and even when he returned to university, graduated, went to interviews, got accepted into a company, and while going to and coming back from work, he always kept playing Dungeon and Stone, and kept dying and dying and dying. Years passed, and he finally reached the final boss room. He said that no one had ever reached that point in the game. 9 years, that was what he sacrificed to get there. Before entering the boss room, the game said that he might never return. It warned him that since it was the final boss, it was extremely dangerous. But he entered anyway, and wondered how many patterns that creature had. However, when it loaded, the system said that he had reached the abyss and that the tutorial was complete. The boy asked, "What do you mean, tutorial?" It was written in Korean. He thought that this thing had only been in English all this time. But the system informed him that the user check was complete. He was hit by a strong beam of light. The pain burned his body. He lost consciousness, and when he woke up, he was facing an unbelievable situation. Around him there were many torches, many other warriors, muscular barbarians, and a bearded man giving a speech, telling everyone to take their weapons. Of course, the man wondered what he was talking about. Weapons? What did he mean by that? First, he calmed himself down to think about the situation. If this was the introduction of a very difficult game, what should he do? Well, he decided to gather information. He realized that his body had rough hands, strong muscles, and tattoos. He was completely shocked by that. In fact, he asks himself, what the hell is happening? Then, the next warrior was called, went forward and picked a double-edged axe as his chosen weapon. After that, the other warriors were called as well, and the barbarian thought that this situation felt familiar. Young warriors choosing their weapons, being recognized as barbarians. Then the bearded man blessed them with the grace of Rafdoa. Now the barbarian was certain he was inside Dungeon and Stone. When he chose the barbarian, that was how the game had started, but he wondered how this had happened. The guy next to him also seemed to have entered the game, and he was very shocked and terrified that he was inside Dungeon and Stone. The barbarian realized that he was different, just like him. He was not the only one who had entered the game. Then the bearded man asked who had spoken, and asked if it was him. The barbarian answered no, and thought that it was because of that idiot. The bearded man said that it was him. Then he simply cut the man's neck, the one who was wondering if this was Dungeon and Stone. The barbarian kept his composure and stayed calm. If he showed any emotion, he would also die. The bearded man said that the child of Kadoa had been possessed by an evil spirit and told everyone to erase from their memories what the evil spirit had said. Then they continued the ceremony. Now the barbarian understood the whole situation. People like him who entered the game were considered evil spirits. You would be killed if someone discovered that. The conclusion was that he needed to go through all of this without being discovered. But there was a small problem. The bearded man was calling everyone by their names and by their parents' names. He did not know his own name. He thought that this was a matter of life and death, and the game didn't even tell him his own name. But he thought of doing the following. If there was a name and no one moved within 2 seconds, he would take a step forward. And that happened when the bearded man called for the son of Jan Delborn. No one moved in 2 seconds, so he stepped forward. That was his name. The bearded man told the young warrior to choose his weapon, and he discovered that it was really him, the son of Jandelborn. Now he needed to make the second important decision. Unlike other classes, barbarians don't have talent or magic, but they have strong physical abilities. That means he needed a close-range weapon, and he already knew what he would choose: a shield. That was the best decision he could make. The bearded man said that with this, Bjorn had become a warrior, and the synchronization was complete. He was level 1, had 25 physical, 35 mental, item level 24, and an overall combat index of 67. When he played this game for the first time as a barbarian, he chose the greatsword because it looked really cool, but he died too often. Then he tried all kinds of weapons, and his gameplay was not very stable since he barely survived most of his battles. One day, he thought about it. A barbarian doesn't necessarily need always to deal damage. They are a race with high vitality and strength. Although they are not as good as tanks like the dwarves, he still had a base to become one. He didn't like this method very much, but when he tested it for the first time, he realized that a shield barbarian was very strong. That was the most rational decision he had ever made while playing Dungeon and Stone, and he would not regret choosing a shield. At that moment, the gates opened, and it was explained that the barbarians who had passed the coming-of-age ceremony would enter the Labyrinth. They would go to the city with the Labyrinth, Raphidonia. The leader said that their destiny was that place. The barbarians moved like an army, everyone running and shouting. Bjorn thought he would run with them for now because he wasn't sure if these guys even knew where they were going. Much later, one of them turned around and said that he thought they were lost. People started blaming the guy who was in front, but Bjorn thought it wasn't like they were very intelligent either. Then Kark gave up his position as leader, so the one who took over was the second daughter of Fenelin, Einar. But later, Einar was also lost. Bjorn wondered if none of these losers had a brain. Now everyone was fighting again because they were lost once more and would never reach the end of that damn labyrinth. Then Bjorn went to Einar, and Einar asked if he had come to blame her too. Bjorn said no, he was there to say how to reach the labyrinth, and told her to just follow those guys over there. And it was a typical RPG group. There was a dwarf, a knight, a mage, and a monk, and they were saying that those filthy barbarians are really stupid, just savage idiots. But Einar liked the idea, and told everyone that she had found the path to the labyrinth. Bjorn thought they really had no brains. Later, they were standing in front of the labyrinth, the great portal that led to it. Bjorn wondered if entering the labyrinth was really the right decision. Honestly, he did not think anyone would notice if he left the group now. He had spent his whole life in a hospital. He did not know how to hit anyone. He did not know how to dodge a single punch. How could someone like him fight monsters in the labyrinth? He wondered if there was no other way to pay the Raphidonia tax without entering the labyrinth. This was one of the most evil systems in the game Dungeon and Stone, the tax. All citizens had to pay it from the age of 20, and they were executed if they failed to pay. The most common ways to get money were entering the labyrinth and fighting monsters or working in the village. The problem was that he was a barbarian. No one hired savages like them. That meant the only option left for him was to kill monsters and earn money from it. And the labyrinth only opened once a month. If he did not enter this time, he would need to find a way to survive for a whole month without money. He probably would not get any job because he was a barbarian, and even if he survived for a month in the village, his condition would be the worst possible. But he was too afraid to move toward the portal. Suddenly, Einar appeared and told Bjorn that everyone had already entered except them. They needed to hurry so they would not arrive too late. There were only 5 minutes left before the labyrinth closed. Bjorn told her to go ahead. He would follow her. Einar thanked him a lot for the help he had given earlier. She asked how she could become wise like him. She had never seen a barbarian as smart as him before. Bjorn thought that you just had to be born again, and told her to think before acting. It was good advice. Einar thanked him for the advice and said she would make sure to return the favor if she came back from the labyrinth. Bjorn thought that in the game, barbarians were people who did not know fear, and they did not seem very different in real life. Bjorn asked if Einar was also afraid of dying. She said that it was natural. After all, they were living beings. She was afraid of dying, but she was born a warrior. If she stayed there doing nothing, she would die as well. And Bjorn thought that none of the barbarians had any choice except to fight. They needed to kill and face death in order to survive. And he was also a barbarian, so he ran straight toward the labyrinth, thinking that he would survive in that damned place. The system informed him that he had entered the Crystal Cave, level 1. Bjorn thought that when it came to dungeon and stone, he was an expert. If he combined his barbarian's tough body with his knowledge of the game, he could survive. That was what he thought, but he could not see anything. He did not know where he was. He did not even know where the others were. Based on the game's design, since there were crystals embedded in the walls of the level 1 labyrinth, there was no need for torches. So Bjorn realized that he was in the dark region, located in the farthest corner of the labyrinth. This area was extremely rare and had no light at all, but he thought that usually you did not start in the dark region. Well, technically, he was no longer in a game. It was as if this was real life now, so the starting point must have been random. He even tried to open his system, the equipment window, status, inventory, but nothing opened, nothing worked at all. So Bjorn just moved in a random direction, trying to find some light. His pace was very slow because of his caution. Even so, he stepped on a goblin trap. He felt an intense pain, but he could not scream. Goblins are the monsters that use traps on level 1. They hide near their traps, waiting for a victim. He was probably lucky that the goblin had not appeared yet. It must have gone far away, and he needed to stay silent. If he screamed in pain, the goblin would appear and kill him. In fact, all the goblins would gather to kill him and eat his flesh. So Bjorn did what was necessary first. There was paralyzing poison in the trap. He removed the trap from his foot, and also his barbarian shoe, and realized that his right foot was already numb. He spoke to the goblin, saying that he knew it was hiding, and told it to come out already. He thought it might have been his imagination. Maybe there was no goblin there, but he would survive anyway. However, the goblin was really there, but behind the barbarian. He heard the goblin's footsteps, and realized it had moved. He asked the goblin what was wrong, and if it was scared. Bjorn knew that the goblin was slowly approaching him, but it was a problem that he still could not see it. So he increased his pace to try to escape, but the goblin kept the same distance. It was happy, laughing, seeing its prey bleeding while running. Bjorn knew that the goblin was a clever bastard, so he changed his plan. He threw himself on the ground, pretending to faint because of the poison. Before approaching, the goblin checked if he was really downed by throwing a stone at his head. Bjorn thought that the goblin was smart as hell, even smarter than barbarians. But when the goblin thought he was truly unconscious, Bjorn tried to attack him, and missed. He was too far away to land the punch. Suddenly his body moved on its own, like some kind of frenzy, and he simply beat the goblin to a pulp. He realized that he was a barbarian. His body was completely different from the sick body of his past life. He broke all the goblin's bones with his fists, destroying that little green monster. When he defeated the goblin, he gained 1 more point of XP. Then the goblin's body disappeared and turned into a magic crystal, specifically a rank 9 one, and it was worth a piece of bread. Bjorn thought that he had struggled so much just for a piece of bread, but he knew that this was a world where labyrinths and monsters existed. When monsters died, they disappeared and left items behind, and in the city there were familiar environments and different races living together. This was the world inside the game he knew, Dungeon and Stone, but he would never confuse his reality by thinking that this was just a game. This was now his life, and he needed to survive. The system warned him that he was bleeding a lot, and that was why he had been crawling for a long time, but at least he was keeping a steady pace. The best reward he could get from crawling like this was not stepping on more traps. He passed very close to another one and realized that he was bleeding more and more. He was getting weak, pale, with sunken eyes. If he continued in that direction, he was sure he would leave the darkness. But then Born wondered what had happened to that other guy who had also come from the real world. When he died, did he return to the beginning? Did he go back to the real world? Now he understood why humans have religion. In moments of despair, it provides hope and distraction. At that moment, he had less than 5% of his life left. And Bjorn finally reached a much brighter region of the labyrinth, but he was getting so tired and worn out that he began to have hallucinations. He saw himself insulting himself, saying that he was just as stupid as the other barbarians. He would probably end up as food for monsters just like the others. Bjorn realized that he was going crazy from so much blood loss, but he needed to survive. He would not give up. With 4% of his life left, he reached the light and came across a group of adventurers. When his life dropped to 2%, he gained 1 more point in mental status. One of the adventurers said he could tell Born was a novice barbarian, and Bjorn couldn't even speak because he was in so much pain. The knight asked the priestess if she could heal the man, but she simply refused. The knight said in that case there was nothing to do. He asked his other friend for one of his potions. What about that? But his friend said they were not for emergencies. The knight replied that he had plenty and that he would pay him back when they got outside. He warned Bjorn that it would hurt a little, but then poured the potion over his wound. His vitality increased rapidly thanks to the recovery, but Bjorn felt intense pain, as if his body were melting. So that was why they didn't allow potions to be used in the middle of battle, because it hurt like hell. But in the end, Bjorn recovered. Then the knight asked, "How did a novice manage to get here before us?" He said that if Bjorn knew a secret passage, he would like to buy that information. Bjorn thought that was the only reason he had survived. He said that he did not know any secret passage. As soon as he stepped into the labyrinth, he was already there. The knight said that he had read about this before. Due to dimensional instability, it was said that you could sometimes fall into the outskirts of the darkness, although the probability was very low. It happened about once every 100 years. Meanwhile, Bjorn was thinking that they must be intermediate or high level because they had a mage and a priestess in the group. And on his very first trip, he went through something that this group had never experienced in their lives. The knight said it was an interesting story and thanked him for it. He said that Bjorn could go without worrying about the value of the potion. Bjorn thought that time spent in the labyrinth was as precious as gold. It was a miracle that this group had wasted time on him. In fact, he should be happy that he survived, but it felt disgusting to be pitied. Later, another adventurer said that the barbarian had been very lucky. If he had stepped on a goblin trap on the first floor, even if it had not killed him instantly, he would eventually have died. He was lucky to have run into their group. The archer said that he was lucky to have met Drouse and not her. She would not even give a small potion to a poor dying man. Then she said that there were many bastards like him, and asked if the priestess did not agree. The priestess stayed silent, and the archer asked if everyone agreed with him, and told Pats that he was very two-faced and should learn from Drouse to care more about others. The knight felt flattered by that compliment. They were following the trail of blood that Bjorn had left all the way. The archer said that judging by the barbarian's mentality so far, she did not think he had been as lucky as Pats said. But Drouse already knew most of the labyrinth map, so they could walk calmly until they finally reached the end of the labyrinth. Drouse said, "Good thing you hurried. That was the passage to the second floor." But the archer noticed that right next to the portal were the sandal the barbarian had been wearing and the trap he had stepped on. The mage said that he thought she was right, and then illuminated the path. They realized that there was another path, completely dark. Drouse asked how long it would take to go back through the whole path. The knight replied that it was about 15 kilometers. The mage said that the barbarian had crawled through complete darkness for 15 kilometers. He was definitely a monstrous person. Pats said that the guy must be almost crazy, because if it were him, he would not have crawled for hours like that. Even so, the barbarian had shown them the magic crystal he had obtained. Even after crawling for all that time, he had not forgotten his exchange item. Pats then said that he took back what he had said before, and asked, "What was the name of that barbarian?" Someone like Bjorn wouldn't die unless it was under very special circumstances. No matter how difficult everything was, no matter how much agony he had to face, he would never treat death as an escape route. After his near-death experience, Bjorn started killing more and more goblins. They kept coming, and Bjorn kept killing them all. He was nervous at first, but once he recovered his sight, goblins were no longer a threat. The traps were placed randomly on the ground, and the goblins' ambushes were very predictable. Because of that, Bjorn killed another one. The only problem was that he was very hungry, but he realized that he still had some of the rations that the deputy chief had given him. However, he noticed that most of it had fallen to the ground because he had been crawling and the bag had torn. While eating half a piece of bread, he said that he would eat the minimum possible, just enough to survive. Bjorn was so hungry that the hard, dry bread, all dirty with dust, tasted delicious, but he was also getting thirsty. The problem was where he would find water in that place. In Dungeon and Stone, there is a hunger system. It only activates inside the labyrinth, so he never needed to carry water around since it was just a game, but this was reality. Now Bjorn thought that the game was already difficult. Just imagine this. Since the deputy chief had not given him any water, there must definitely be some kind of water source inside the dungeon. Eventually, he finally heard the sound of water, and there he found a person. Aside from the blonde group, this was his first encounter. But there was no conversation. He simply turned his back and left. It was as if there was an unspoken rule in the labyrinth. You were not supposed to interact with other adventurers unless it was absolutely necessary. Later, Bjorn was counting his magic stones. He had collected about 44 of them. There were many. Bjorn thought that he almost died at the beginning, so this was an impressive result. But there was another problem. He was very sleepy. There were 2 ways to sleep in the labyrinth. The first was to leave your life in God's hands and sleep. The second was to find allies to protect each other. But when he approached the first group, they were afraid of him. The second group did not like Bjorn. The third group had prejudice against barbarians. He was rejected by everyone. Bjorn said there were only sons of bitches there. Until finally, someone appeared and asked if Bjorn was looking for allies. He said that the barbarian seemed trustworthy, but maybe he wasn't very interested. He also wanted to spend the night in the labyrinth, and Bjorn said that he was right. He was also looking for someone. Bjorn thought that in the game this was called a night companion, and the man introduced himself as Hans. When Bjorn introduced himself, Hans said that it would be even better to have 3 night companions, but it seemed like a waste of time to keep looking for another, so they could spend the night with just the 2 of them. Bjorn thought, why was the guy talking like that, but said, okay. Hans said they could play rock, paper, scissors to decide who would sleep first. Hans won, so he slept first. Bjorn thought he already knew he would lose. He had no luck. Hans showed him his watch, explaining how it worked, and said that Bjorn could wake him up when the hand reached a certain point. Bjorn thought he was explaining how a watch worked, as if a barbarian wouldn't know that. He was sure that this is how most people thought about barbarians in Dungeon and Stone, but he would use that as an advantage. Later, Hans was sleeping very comfortably, as if he weren't inside a labyrinth. Bjorn thought it was boring since there were no goblins or other adventurers, but it was convenient. Then he realized that time had passed and woke Hans up. When Hans woke, he said that Bjorn should sleep too and that he would wake him up in 2 hours. But Bjorn thought it was too risky to sleep next to someone he had just met. Even so, Hans was snoring heavily, completely passed out, like a savage who had a long day. But Bjorn was only pretending to sleep and hoped that Hans wouldn't notice. It was working perfectly. Hans said that he was a very funny species, so Bjorn turned around, thinking he would deliberately make himself vulnerable so Hans would reveal his true intentions. But on the next shift, Bjorn was really tired because he had not slept at all. For 2 hours, Hans didn't attack him. He should have slept. Now Hans is passed out again. Even though Bjorn felt like he would die from exhaustion, he still couldn't sleep. But in the end, he passed out. He woke up later with Hans waking him, saying that luckily nothing had happened while he was sleeping. He told him to relax. Bjorn said that Hans, if he wanted to sleep a little more, he could. That was his mistake. Hans said no. Bjorn looked tired. Now he could sleep. It was his turn to keep watch. Bjorn thanked him for that. He thought Hans seemed like a nice guy. He talked to him first, since he was in a difficult situation, and didn't blame him for sleeping. He even refused to be compensated for his mistake. In the dungeon in stone, he knew there was no one that kind. And when Bjorn opened his eyes, Hans was ready to smash his head with a hammer. Bjorn managed to dodge in time. Of course, Hans was very shocked by that, and even tried to make up an excuse later. Bjorn thought how stupid Hans thought barbarians were, and immediately punched the adventurer in the face, knocking him down. Hans said he could explain, but Bjorn thought, like goblins, he did not die with one single hit, so the next attack was with the shield straight to his face. Hans apologized. He begged to live, please, but Bjorn asked why he had done it. Hans said he wanted the crystals, all of his magic crystals. Bjorn wondered if Hans was really going to kill a barbarian just for a few crystals, just some small change. And Hans said that it was not only that, he also wanted his shield. Barbarian equipment was high quality and could be sold for a good price. Bjorn asked if that was really true, and Hans asked if he would let him go. No. Hans was kicked in the face and then stepped on by Bjorn. Bjorn knew that killing another adventurer in Dungeon in Stone was considered a very serious crime, so there had to be another reason. Hans said that barbarian hearts were sold for an extremely high price. They were used as ingredients for a new enchantment, and now Bjorn understood. To that man, he was just a creature, like a goblin, hard to catch, but valuable enough to take the risk. Bjorn asked why Hans had not done it the first time when he was sleeping. Hans answered that he needed to sleep too. Bjorn thought that this guy was not careful at all. It was just luck. Hans said that he had told him everything and asked if Bjorn would forgive him, and Bjorn replied, "Forgive you?" He would probably meet many more people like Hans on his path, and they would all say the same thing, and he would not forgive every single one of them. Hans begged for mercy, screamed for his life, but Bjorn killed him. He realized that he had killed a man. He obtained the achievement for his first murder. His mentality increased by one more point. It had already been 2 days since he had entered this world. He took all of Hans's equipment, the shoulder pads, the backpack, the hammer, and even the leather boots. He specialized in living in a wild environment. He drank water from his bottle when he was thirsty, used the compass, checked the watch when he wanted to know the time, and was able to treat wounds with bandages and potions. Bjorn thought this was ironic. When he killed a man, he became able to live like a man. Then he continued killing goblins. Now, with his hammer, it was much easier to kill these creatures. Even so, he knew that he should not have chosen weapons from the beginning. The shield had been extremely useful to him so far. And Bjorn thought that barbarians were really strange. During fights, it felt like he was in someone else's body, as if he were being controlled by this urge to fight. Since he was on the second day in the labyrinth, goblins started appearing in pairs. His combat stats increased a lot thanks to his new equipment, so killing goblins became very easy. The problem was that he was dying of exhaustion. He had been fighting goblins non-stop since he killed Hans. He would not last much longer if he did not sleep. He thought that maybe it was better not to have a night companion, since there was a higher chance of surviving being stabbed by goblin daggers than being betrayed by another adventurer. But as soon as he started to doze off, they appeared. Bjorn begged for at least 10 minutes, damn it, and smashed them with his hammer. Then he killed all the goblins he saw and took a short nap. Later, he woke up with a goblin stabbing him in the stomach. Bjorn cursed and crushed the first one's face. The second one got terrified and simply ran away. Bjorn thought that he did not even have the energy to chase that bastard. He thought that it was a good thing he was tall. If he were a little shorter, the goblin would have cut his throat. First, he treated his wound with a healing potion. Then, 14 hours after Hans's death, Bjorn thought that it was time for most people to start looking for knight companions. But he could not trust anyone anymore, now that he knew barbarian hearts were very valuable here. But how would Bjorn know if it were another barbarian he could trust them? But when he looked for barbarians, he only found humans, and more humans. And unlike yesterday, everyone wanted Bjorn in their group, but he refused them all, saying that he was looking for a barbarian. One of the humans said that this would be very difficult. They usually awakened 2 to 3 months after the coming-of-age ceremony, so there should be fewer than 100 barbarians on the first floor. Bjorn thought that, well, given his size, it was kind of shameful to be struggling here on the first floor. He thought that maybe he should give up looking for a barbarian and be realistic. It didn't matter if it was a barbarian or not. He just needed a knight companion, maybe one that was not human. Elves always kept their promises. Dwarves were as straightforward as barbarians. They would be the best. But it didn't really matter as long as they were not human. Most other races had special characteristics different from humans. They would not harm other adventurers just for small change, like cursed humans do. On the way, Bjorn found an elven archer completely isolated in the middle of the path. The system warned him that he had found an injured elf. Of course, she became afraid when she saw Bjorn. She was very defensive, and Bjorn thought she was right. After all, he was a barbarian approaching an injured elf. Her wound was in her stomach, but he did not think it was a goblin who had done it. Bjorn asked if she had been injured by a human, right? And the elf knelt down and begged for help. She begged, please, please, to let her live. She had a little brother at home who needed her. And Bjorn wondered, what kind of cowardly elf is this kid? Most elves in the game were cold and calculating. He thought she would be like that too, but she was not. Bjorn was going to get rid of this misunderstanding with a smile, but his smile was extremely frightening. He said that he had no intention of killing her, but the elf thought he was lying. She knew he was a barbarian and asked if he really needed to do this, and begged him to let her live. And Bjorn wondered what barbarians even did in this world. He asked why she did not treat her wounds first and talk later. Then he threw her a bandage and a medicinal herb so she could treat herself. The elf asked why he was giving that to her. Bjorn asked if there had to be a reason to help someone. Well, he thought he did have a reason. He wanted to make her his nighttime companion. It might sound bad, but it was not the worst situation for her either. She was injured and tired. It was even a worse situation for her than for Bjorn. When she finished treating herself, he realized she was quite skilled, and since she felt more comfortable, he introduced himself. She also introduced herself, and her name was Irvin. Bjorn asked why she was so afraid of him. Irvin said that she was an elf and he was a barbarian. Barbarians and elves were hostile toward each other. And Bjorn realized that this was very relevant information, but it was the first time he had heard about this. He thought they had a good relationship in the game. Irvin said, well, the war ended 10 years ago, right? She did not hold any grudge against barbarians, so she did not want to fight him. But Bjorn wondered how much time had passed since the game he knew. Anyway, he did not have time to find someone else now, so he also did not hold a grudge about it, and asked if Irvin would like to become his nighttime companion. He was very tired now. He was sure she was too. Then Irvin remembered that barbarians had a lot of honor. They treated warrior oaths as the most important thing, and she asked if he would swear on his warrior's honor that he would not hurt her. She said she would also swear by the name of her tribe. Bjorn thought he did not really care, so fine. He made the oath and said not to call him Sir, just Bjorn. He was only 20 years old. So he swore on his warrior's honor, and Irvin swore by the name of her tribe. Bjorn thought he could finally have a proper sleep. He said he would sleep first. He was sure she would prefer that too, to feel safer. Irvin said not exactly, but if he wanted to. Then Bjorn gave her his pocket watch and finally lay down. He woke up 2 hours later with Irvin waking him up. Bjorn did not even know what time he had fallen asleep. He had just passed out. So that was the synergy of a blanket and a backpack. Then he lent his sleeping bag to Irvin as well. She was very grateful for that and lay down immediately and passed out too. She fell asleep the moment her head hit the pillow. Bjorn was sure she was exhausted as well. Her day must have been even tiring than his. 3 days had already passed inside the labyrinth, and he was wondering what was happening to him in real life. Was he considered missing? And he wondered who would even worry about his disappearance. Well, he stopped thinking about that. After several guard shifts, it was time to leave, with 10 minutes left before waking Irvin again. Bjorn wondered if he should ask her to do this again, since she was an elf and would perform well in battle. But if they became allies, they would have to split the items. Even with several goblins appearing, he could kill 3 or 4 by himself at the same time. Then he asked himself, safety while sleeping or more magic crystals? Suddenly, a group of humans passed by. The skinny guy asked if that was not the elf, and the blonde guy said yes. The bow and arrows looked similar. They asked the barbarian what his relationship with the elf was. Bjorn said that as you could see, they were nighttime companions. The blonde guy said that an elf and the barbarian was fascinating and asked how much time was left. Bjorn said he was not obligated to answer. The blonde guy said, okay, and they left. Bjorn had a very bad feeling about that. The humans were definitely after Irvin, so he woke her up. Irvin said 5 more minutes. Bjorn thought she was about to die, being chased by humans, and she was sleeping. And then Bjorn realized that she was clearly pretending to sleep, and she was pretending very badly. So Bjorn pulled her and asked why she was pretending, but Irvin said that if she got up, he would abandon her. Bjorn wondered if that was what she was worried about. Irvin and he were not officially allies, just nighttime companions, a relationship based on sleeping and then each one going their own way. But he asked what happened between her and those two. Irvin said that nothing happened. She did not know who they were, but they were probably from the same clan that tried to hurt her. The symbol on their clothes was the same. They were called the Crystal Union. And Bjorn thought that this was worrying that an entire group was after her. He should cut ties with this elf and go his own way. But, well, he felt sorry for her. He said they could talk on the way. Irvin asked if he would help her. Bjorn said that first he would listen to her story and then decide, and he would listen while they walked, since time was short. Irvin said that was fine, that would be great. She said that she met them on her first day inside the labyrinth as nighttime companions, but one of the humans tried to do bad things to her. She only found out later, but apparently he was the manager of the clan that did business on the first floor. She managed to escape, but ended up injured while being chased. They probably used communication stones to keep tracking her. She said they were mystical devices that allowed synchronized communication. The range was about 200 meters. Bjorn thought that this was basically the equivalent of walkie-talkies. No place to go, lots of manpower, mystical devices. If he left Irvin, she would definitely be captured. And he said that she must have done something wrong, right? That was why they kept chasing her. Bjorn asked if they were trying to silence her so she wouldn't tell anyone. Irvin said it wasn't just that. Well, while she was escaping, she had thrown her knife and it hit him in a very bad place. You know, yeah. Bjorn asked, what do you mean a very bad place? You mean that place? Irvin said it was that place. Well, she even heard the others shouting that he had not fully recovered. Bjorn thought that was more than enough reason for them to chase her. Irvin apologized for that, but then she realized they were being followed. They were 150 meters away. Bjorn thought that was a large enough distance for him not to feel anything. Maybe that was an elf ability. Bjorn said that they should speed up. Irvin's wound reopened, but she still did not complain. She was tough. But Irvin said that even if they went faster, the distance was still 150 meters. Bjorn said that the pursuer was matching their pace. In the meantime, he was sure the pursuer was reporting their location. They had to eliminate this group. Bjorn thought that if he were the target, he would do the same. But from the moment he killed someone from that group, there would be no turning back. So he had to be careful. Why was he taking this risk? What was the benefit? He needed more detailed information. He asked if Irvin was good at something. She said she was good at washing clothes and cleaning the house. He meant in combat, idiot. Irvin said she was very good with a bow and with fire spirit magic. Bjorn thought that the fire element was the rarest and asked if she had ever killed anyone before. Irvin answered that she had not, but she could do it. Then Bjorn asked if she wanted to become his companion until they left the labyrinth. He would keep 90% of the items and she would get 10%. No discussion. Irvin accepted immediately and said that the distance to the pursuer was now 100 meters. Now Bjorn thought that he was getting close very fast. So they made a detour to the dark part of the cave, thinking that he would come there on his own. Irvin lit the path with fire spirit magic, and when they found a good hiding place, she canceled her spell so they could stay in the shadows. And the pursuer appeared at the end of that cave corridor. He came there even without seeing anything and stopped right behind them. They must have had good tracking skills. They were probably well trained. Whispering, Bjorn told Irvin to shoot immediately, and her arrow hit the pursuer straight in the head. He died instantly. Bjorn said she did well. If she had hesitated, they could be in danger now. Then he managed to take the communication device from the guy. The person on the other end said they had lost contact with Certain, who had been chasing the elf and the barbarian, and told everyone listening to that transmission to gather in the Goblin District. Later, Bjorn was looting Certain's items. He did not have anything very good. A bag full of magic crystals, 2 daggers, and a potion. And he gave the clothes to Irvin so she would feel a little warmer and more protected. Bjorn said they were much better than the clothes she had been wearing before. Bjorn noticed that her mood had changed too, in a good way, and asked her, how do you use this communication stone? Irvin said that you had to press a button on the side, and when he did that, he heard their communication again. They said that Cerdin, who had been chasing that elf, had been defeated. She was in the Goblin District with a barbarian who had a hammer and a sword. The reward was 10,000 gold for their heads. And of course, that made her desperate. But Bjorn told her not to worry. She would summon the spirit and they would travel along the borders of the cave. They would go directly to the second floor. Irvin asked if they were really going there on their own. She said that the first and second floors were completely different. Bjorn said he was aware of that, but everything would be fine if they stayed close to the entrance, since the two of them were a good combination. He knew that a melee tank and an archer behind him had always been a good combination. The second floor would be very profitable for both of them, but Irvin said that maybe it was still too early for that. Then suddenly, another message came through the communication stone, saying that if anyone found that elf, they would be given the right to enjoy her instead of the 10,000 gold. Bjorn told her not to worry. He would not allow that. And Irvin said she was scared, but she would go to the second floor. Bjorn thought, good, I do not need to convince her anymore. He had always liked helping those in need, when it benefited him, of course. So if he could mess with those bastards and have the self-satisfaction of doing something good, it would be the best of both worlds. There was no reason not to help. Later, still walking through the darkness, Irvin asked if he knew how to reach the second floor. Bjorn said he did not know the exact path, but if they kept going north, they would eventually get there. The dungeon was built in such a way that if you kept following the darkness, you would reach a portal, since it represented the path that led to the upper floors. Then she noticed there was a goblin trap on the way, and Bjorn thought that maybe goblins did not appear so frequently during the day. He had just been unlucky. Irvin said she would take care of it, but Bjorn said it would be better not to use the spirit. And she said, oh, that's right, of course, she already knew that. When Irvin approached the trap, two goblins tried to ambush her, but she dodged and hit the first one cleanly, then finished the second with another arrow. Bjorn said she was great. There was no doubt that she was an elf with excellent archery skills. She handed him the crystals, saying that he would take 9 and she would take 1. But there was something her little brother always asked for. If they kept progressing like this, she would be able to buy it for him. Bjorn told her to keep working hard then. And then they heard on the communication stone that the reward for the elf had been increased to 20,000 gold, alive or dead. Bjorn told her not to worry. They would not find them in the darkness. That group did not seem to have good teamwork either. Many of them didn't even care about the reward. But Bjorn thought that something felt strange. Everything was going too well. Judging by the situation, something bad was bound to happen soon, since he was unlucky. And indeed, they ran into a horde of ghouls. On the first floor, depending on the direction you go, you can find different monsters. But Bjorn knew that ghosts should only appear in the south. Maybe they had gone too far along the path. Bjorn knew that the XP reward system of Dungeon and Stone was very strange. You were only rewarded the first time you defeated a monster of the same species, meaning that you had to defeat as many different species as possible to level up. And he told Irvin that this was a great opportunity. When he took the lead, the ghouls quickly tracked him and all rushed in trying to devour Bjorn. He knew that ghouls were stronger and faster than goblins, but they were still rank 9. His hammer blows crushed their heads easily. And Irvin also killed the last one with an arrow in the head, easy as pie. Then they continued north, until eventually they reached the third day. Then Irvin found a trail of blood, and Bjorn realized it was his own blood. The first place he had stepped when he entered the labyrinth is exactly where the portal was. And he said, "You've got to be kidding me with this crap." The portal was less than 10 meters away from his starting point. He was the luckiest guy in the world. Irvin apologized. She asked if she had done something wrong. Bjorn said no, it wasn't her fault. And now Irvin connected everything. The blood, the sandal, the expression on his face. And she said that he must have gone through a lot, and that she was sure his companions had already gone to heaven. Bjorn realized that she thought his companions had died, but he asked if she was ready to move on. She was a little scared, but she didn't think she would die if she stayed with him. And they headed to the second floor, the Goblin Forest. They simply fell backward. Well, Bjorn fell. Irvin landed on her feet. He wondered what it would feel like to go through the portal. It felt like he was chewed by a frog and spat out. Irvin said she was surprised. It was the first time she had come out of a portal by falling. Bjorn thought he was jealous of her agility. First of all, they had to explore the area. There was a portal behind them that would take them back to the first floor, and he did not sense any beings within 50 miles radius. And thanks to the starry sky, everything was well lit. Irvin asked if this was really the second floor. She thought it was not a forest. Bjorn said she must be referring to a different second floor. There were 4 portals on the first floor, and each one led to a different region. The north led to the Goblin Forest, the east to the Beast Den, the west to the Land of the Dead, and the south to the Dark Rocky Mountain. But all of them eventually led to the third floor. Irvin said that they return automatically once the labyrinth closes, 168 hours for the first floor and 240 hours for the second. When the time runs out, the labyrinth sends all explorers back to the city. Bjorn said that the Crystal Union wouldn't come here, since they can barely work together. They would stay on the second floor until the 168 hours passed, and at the last moment return to the first floor and be sent back. But they also couldn't just stay still, so they started exploring the Goblin Forest. Irvin said that for her it was nostalgic to enter a forest. Even knowing there were only monsters, it felt like the fairy sanctuary. Then she said there was a trap right there. Bjorn didn't see it, so she revealed it with a stone. Bjorn wondered if that was elf detection. It was incredible, but he had no reason to praise her, so he said she was pretty good at throwing little stones. It had always been her job to find traps. He told her not to get too excited when she succeeded. She was already a full explorer. It should be normal. Irvin said it was fine. A full explorer. Bjorn thought she was easy to manipulate. Poor thing. But Irvin said something was wrong. There were traps, but she didn't sense any goblins in the area. Bjorn thought that, unlike the first floor, having traps didn't mean goblins were nearby. The traps on the second floor were just a map attribute. Besides the traps, another characteristic of this forest was that goblins walked in groups of 12, and sometimes there were mutant goblins that became warriors or archers, but that shouldn't matter, since they planned to stay close to the portal. Bjorn said they should get rid of all the traps in that region so they could expand their territory and explore slowly and more safely. So they widened their exploration area until Irvin sensed a group of goblins approaching. She didn't know exactly how many, but she was sure there were more than 10. They were about 50 meters away, but they still hadn't seen them. Bjorn said they would fight here, and asked how close they could get without being noticed. Irvin said she could get to about 30 meters alone. Bjorn said to follow the usual plan. Later, he thought it was incredible how Irmin could move without making any noise at all. She really was a very skilled elf, until she spotted the goblins and told Bjorn where they were. The first attack was hers. She hit a goblin squarely with her arrow. Then Bjorn took the front line, thinking that the second floor really was very different. 3 times more goblins, and one of them was even a warrior, but he didn't feel any fear at all. The warrior's heart inside him was beating stronger than ever, and he went forward, smashing through the goblin front line. It was hammer strikes, shield bashes to the face. He almost got hit by a dagger from one of the goblins. His head almost went flying, but he wasn't hesitant. He wasn't afraid. That was because, besides being a warrior, he wasn't alone. Irvin was providing excellent cover, killing goblins with her arrows, and Bjorn said it was time to finish this quickly. Later, he gained 1 more XP from the Goblin Warrior, and gained a total of 11 magic crystals. Considering that it had taken him an entire day to get 44 of them on the first floor, this was a very satisfying reward. He wanted to take the Goblin Warrior's weapon or armor, but they disappeared along with him. So he gave her the crystals that Irvin deserved, and he was really eager to see how much he would be able to earn by the end of these days. Later, they expanded their exploration to a much larger radius, about 3 kilometers. Then, groups of goblins started appearing every 5 minutes, and this time there was an archer among them. In addition, they had stealth magic. They simply disappeared in midair. Bjorn thought it would be difficult, but they would not lose. While he was on the front line, the goblin archer almost hit him, but he knew exactly how to deal with that type of creature. He dodged, closed the distance, and smashed the goblin's head with his hammer, gaining 1 more experience point for killing a different creature, a goblin archer. When they took a break, Irvin said that they were finally resting a little. She didn't even know how long they had been walking. Bjorn said it had been around 15 hours, and told her she could sleep first if she wanted. Then he set up a small blanket and pillow for her, and he thought that she must be exhausted. He noticed that for the first time she was making noise while sleeping. Bjorn thought she must be feeling safer by his side. They hunted for exactly 15 hours. They gained far more rewards than he had expected, but they also started encountering other adventurers as they expanded their area. All of them were in groups of 3 people or more, and sometimes there were even otherworldly species. Of course, they only passed by these groups, but just seeing them drained his energy. Those adventurers were much scarier than goblins, especially because he had a reason to be worried. He said it was a problem that Irvin was so beautiful. She woke up hearing that and asked if she really was that beautiful. Bjorn told her to go back to sleep. On the 4th day, they continued their exploration. The 5th and 6th days passed until finally the 7th day arrived. They were extremely tired, and Bjorn said it was finally time to leave the labyrinth. There were 2 hours and 47 minutes left until the first floor closed. Irvin said she was so tired that she would sleep a lot when they returned. Bjorn said he would too, and he thought they should go soon. It was better to arrive early than to be late. But Irvin said there were more traps on the way, and Bjorn knew that the goblin groups must have respawned. She said there was a group 70 meters away, 8 normal goblins, 2 archers, and 2 warriors. Bjorn said they would fight. The goblins didn't stand a chance anymore. They already had so much combat experience that Bjorn simply charged in, wiping them out like a beast. Irvin took care of the enemies that were farther away, while Bjorn completely destroyed the front line. He had become a master at this kind of fight, and Irvin was getting better and better as well. She said there were 2 archers, but he hadn't seen any arrows coming toward him. Bjorn said she did an excellent job. He thought she had grown so much over the last few days, and he felt very proud. But Irvin said there was something strange about that goblin. It was an essence, the essence of a goblin archer. Bjorn thought, of all places, it had to be here. Essence is part of the skill system of the game Dungeon and Stone. It grants 1 passive skill and 1 active skill, each with variable attributes depending on the type. You can only take 1 per level, but it is basically the key to success. That is why it is considered more valuable than a treasure for an explorer, although there is a limit to how much you can absorb. The abilities of an essence vary greatly depending on the goblin, and the drop rate is close to 0. Bjorn never expected to see something like this here, but he thought it was too much luck. Knowing how unlucky he was, he had a bad feeling. Irvin asked if she would turn into a goblin if she consumed the essence. Bjorn said no, you only gain part of its abilities. For example, the guy who chased them on the first floor probably had the essence of a wolf, tracking them by scent. Bjorn asked if she wanted the essence. She said she would only take it if he didn't want it. Bjorn realized she was being shameless, but he didn't want this one. Anyway, he already knew which essence he wanted. If he took essences without thinking about the future, he would have to spend mountains of money later, and the essence of a goblin archer wasn't that good for him. So he said Irvin could keep it. At that moment, a group of adventurers appeared, and of course they were there to try and steal the essence. Irvin even tried to answer, saying they were hunting, but Bjorn said there was no need to respond to that kind of person. He simply pushed her towards the essence, making her consume it. The group said that essence was theirs. Irvin thanked him for that, and he thought he had been waiting to run into people like this. They probably had rushed over when they sensed the essence, but now they couldn't do anything, since Irvin had already consumed it. Bjorn said that if they wanted to come at him, they could. He was ready. He was ready to fight. Later, they were running back to the portal because time was running out, and Irvin asked if Bjorn really thought they had gotten rid of those guys. When they were intimidated by Bjorn, they promised to make him pay. Bjorn thought that even if they didn't follow them, they would probably end up in the same place anyway. That was because they were a group of 4 people. That is a good number for a run on the 2nd floor, but they were wandering near the entrance, which meant they knew where the portal was and were probably planning to do the same thing, returning to the 1st floor at the last moment. But Irvin sensed a group of goblins 50 meters away. They were not in front of them, they were behind them. Bjorn thought this was very strange. The goblins hadn't found them during the last few days. He knew this couldn't be a coincidence. And at that moment, Irvin was almost hit by an arrow, but Bjorn pulled her aside so she could dodge it. He immediately knew that arrow wasn't from a goblin archer, and said it was those guys from before. That group must have deliberately attracted the goblins because they were waiting for them on the opposite side. Their plan was to exhaust them by using the goblin group. Bjorn said they had to fight and told her to use her power. Every essence has its own special ability. The The one Irvin had absorbed earlier was from a goblin archer. According to the game system, it increases stats and grants one passive and one active skill. The passive is Poison Arrow, and the active is Thief Step, which puts her into stealth mode. But Irvin said she didn't know how to use it, and Bjorn told her she was already using it. And indeed, Irvin was already using Thief Step. Bjorn thought that was interesting. It worked simply because she wanted it to. So he handed her the backpack and said he would deal with the goblins alone first. Meanwhile, she should go after the group in stealth mode. Irvin said it was too dangerous for him to go alone, but Bjorn knew they didn't have time. She had to stay hidden, and when he gave the signal she should kill the guy with the crossbow. He told her not to mess anything up until the right moment. After running for a bit, Bjorn was already at the perfect distance. While he fought the goblins, he knew that group wouldn't show up for now. There were 12 goblins. 2 of them were warriors. He didn't know there was also an archer, and when he blocked the first arrow, he lowered his guard and ended up getting stabbed in the back by a goblin. But he endured it. He had to endure. He had to be the shield so that Irvin could kill those bastards. However, the wounds on his body kept piling up until he finally killed all of them. But he was in a dangerous situation. He was hit by 2 arrows at the same time, one from the goblin and the other from the guy in the group. It was impossible to block both, so he chose to block the adventurer's arrow and was hit in the elbow by the goblin's arrow. It was poisoned, so he could no longer move that arm. He only had his right arm left to protect himself. So he pulled the arrow out and chose to use the shield instead of the hammer. Bjorn knew that the real enemies were the damn adventurers, not the goblins. So he started killing the goblins with the shield while also defending himself from the adventurers' attacks, and the last goblins ran away from him. Then the group of adventurers asked if he had really managed to get rid of the goblins. That was impressive, and Bjorn said he knew it was them, but the guy with the crossbow was still positioned somewhere. And the leader of their group asked, "So, where's the little elf, huh?" Bjorn told them to come at me already. The man said he really was a barbarian, full of energy even after fighting goblins, but he was badly injured. If he handed over the elf, they would let him go. And Bjorn thought he must think he was really that stupid. The group leader told everyone not to lower their guard. They should think as if they were hunting a giant monster. Then all of them charged at him. Bjorn's left arm still wasn't moving, and he really hoped that Irvin had found the crossbow guy. Then he gave the signal, which was a middle finger. The group leader asked what the hell he was doing, and Bjorn wondered if Irvin had recognized the signal. He couldn't hear anything because she was too far away. He had no choice but to trust her. So, even though the shield was a defensive weapon, he was the one who advanced. The guy with the katana had to attack Bjorn to break his defense, but he couldn't retreat. He had to distract them while Irvin found her opening, until an arrow flew towards all of them. Bjorn didn't know if it was from the crossbow guy or from Irvin, but he found out when the group's shield-bearer had to protect their leader. The shield-bearer said he would keep blocking the arrows while the others focused on the barbarian, and that it was very easy to block all those arrows. Bjorn thought that shield-bearer was a real bastard. He was blocking all of Irvin's arrows with ease. Meanwhile, the others were closing in on him from the front and from behind. The barbarian couldn't defeat them all alone at once. So he gave up on defense. He took a hit from behind and landed a direct blow on the group leader, knocking out a bunch of his teeth at once. Then he turned at the exact moment the katana user attacked, managing to dodge it. And the old man was almost hit by another one of Irvin's arrows, but the shield-bearer was there to protect him. What he didn't expect was a firing arrow with Irvin's spiritual power, which burned through his shield. Bjorn thought, "My arrow is a spiritual arrow, you bastards," and he managed to knock the shield-bearer down temporarily so he could attack the guy with the katana. The group leader ran off to deal with Irvin. Bjorn knew that was a problem. He had to chase that guy, but he couldn't face 2 enemies at once. He had to trust her. His next strike was supposed to hit the bald old man, but he dodged, and the shield-bearer took the blow straight to the face instead. The bald katana user was now alone, but Bjorn knew he was very strong, and couldn't understand why he was in such a weak group. That was actually the biggest mistake he had made so far. The katana user was only buying time for his group to return, but Bjorn wouldn't let that happen. Instead of striking with his shield, he picked up speed and threw himself straight at the old man's face. The barbarian asked if he really thought he would die here. Then Bjorn bit the adventurer's neck, ripping out his jugular and killing him instantly. After that extremely bloody fight, Irvin came back asking if he was okay, and the barbarian thought, what? It seemed she had won her fight as well. Irvin said his injuries were terrible and that he needed a potion quickly. He said it was better to drink it than pour it on the wound, because he was poisoned. After drinking the potion, he felt his insides bubbling and boiling. His skin was hot. It hurt like hell, but he was healing. He asked what time it was. Irvin said it was 11:20 and that 10 minutes had passed. Bjorn knew there were only 40 minutes left before the first floor closed. They didn't have time to rest. So he told Irvin to take off her clothes, and she asked what he meant. Irvin thought he must have a good reason, so she started taking off her clothes, and Bjorn said it was for her to take the idiot's clothes, not hers, and she said, oh, right. Bjorn said they didn't have much time, so they should take the backpacks and whatever was inside. They took everything they could. Then they ran back to the portal with only 40 seconds left before it closed. They jumped through the portal and arrived rolling on the ground, completely messed up. Bjorn admitted he had panicked a little, and Irvin said he had done a great job. He said she had too.